Guys, welcome back to Just Disciple. My name is Brooks. I'm here with our resident genius, Ken Frede. Hey. And guys, we love to talk about theology and stuff. So, what are we on here to talk about? Can Christians celebrate birthdays?
Ooh.
Right? There's a lot of questions like this that come up in the Christian life, right? God saves us, He makes us new, and then we look to glorify God with our lives. How do I walk away from the sinfulness of my past, walk in the newness of life, and obedience to the Scriptures? Right, so it's very important to Christians, and then we come across questions like this, like, I start to question, I was celebrating my birthday. Is that something I should still do if I'm following Christ? Right? I mean,
it's a fair point.
Fair question to be asking. So we wanted to give you an answer, of course, from the Bible. We believe the Bible is inerrant. It's sufficient to inform all of our life and pursuit of godliness. So we want to give you an answer from the Bible about whether or not it's okay to celebrate birthdays. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So, Ken, in your humble opinion.
My humble opinion, here we go.
Is it okay to celebrate your birthday as a Christian?
Is it okay to celebrate your birthday as a Christian? Yes, I think it's okay. The Bible does not condemn it at all. You know, it's not like, oh my gosh, explicitly here it is. There are a few passages in the Bible that reference birthdays that we need to chat about it in dialogue, because I think some people get their theology out of it, but I think it can be easily explained.
Yeah, and you know what? There are bad ways to celebrate birthdays.
Yeah.
You could look at that. There's a lot of bad ways to celebrate anything or
really?
To do anything.
Yeah.
You can ruin lots of things with the way you choose to live and do whatever. But the Bible doesn't necessarily condemn birthdays. This all comes back to this idea. Do we want to say, okay, the Bible doesn't really talk about birthdays that much. It doesn't condemn it. Does that mean if the Bible doesn't condemn something and doesn't say much about it, does that mean we should avoid it, or does that mean we're free to do it?
Yeah.
So it's an actually very interesting question. In general, the Bible does give us a lot of good, very deep, what am I trying to say? Guidance, that's the word. In general, the Bible does give us a lot of guidance about what we should or shouldn't do, right?
Yeah.
So things go a long way. What I mean by that is when the Apostle John says, little children, rid yourself of idols. Okay, we can look at that and say, that's just not saying like throw our idols that we had, our shrines that we've built. It's saying look at the idols that we have in our hearts and our lives, right? So the commands of Scripture go a pretty long way, generally. When it comes to birthdays specifically, they're not condemned. There's no reason any command in the Bible gives for us to not celebrate them at all. There's just no biblical reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's no biblical reason to give up on celebrating your birthday. There is guidance about how Christians ought to live on any given day, including your birthday. And so I think that the Bible's commands about Thanksgiving, about rejoicing, and what the Bible teaches about God's gift of life to us have a lot to do with us celebrating birthdays. And then His commands to not be drunkards, and His commands to pursue holiness and righteousness. Those have a lot to say about how we celebrate birthdays as well. But there's one more thing to talk about. Ken?
It's the bad examples in the Bible. Like we do have to address them, right? So the first one is in the Old Testament. It talks about Pharaoh having these birthdays and all these things, right? And we can look at them and we're like, well, Pharaoh was a bad guy, right? Pharaoh in the Bible typically was worshipped as a god. So you're like, well, if Pharaoh did that, we must automatically not do that as well. Well, that's false. That's illogical to say that, right? There's certain things that are set up that good people and bad people do, right? This is gonna be a silly example, but like we all breathe, right? Bad people breathe, good people breathe, right? Like all of us breathe. So if all of a sudden you say this bad person breathed.
It's breathed.
It's breathed. For some reason I forgot. I was like, if bad people breathe, we can't all of a sudden say, oh, good people shouldn't do that
Resident
either.
genius.
Resident genius. I was like, breath. And I know that's a silly example, but it proves the point that you're like, just because Pharaoh did it doesn't mean that we can't do it either. It was just showing a historical fact that like during the Pharaoh's birthday, this is what happened. Okay, now there were certain pharaohs that actually did certain good things to people too. So just be mindful of that, right? You want to speak into that?
No, I just wanted to reinforce what you said. when someone bad does something, it doesn't necessarily make the action that they took
Yeah.
bad, or the thing that they celebrated or did bad. We have to weigh that, because we believe in the sufficiency of Scripture, against what the Scripture teaches in this is a big theologian term here, but in the didactic portions of Scripture. So we take what we see in the narrative, like the narrative of Pharaoh celebrating his birthday,
Yeah.
and then we say, okay, what does the Bible teach us about how we should understand this? How does the teaching portion, the doctrinal portion of the Bible, tell us that we should interpret that?
Yeah.
Right? So I think it's really important to understand that just because Pharaoh celebrated a birthday, that doesn't necessarily make it bad. And the second example is in the New Testament, where King Herod has just arrested John the Baptist because John the Baptist spoke out against Herod taking his brother's wife for himself. John said, that is immoral, you shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Herod got mad, arrested John, threw himself a birthday party where he brought in his brother's wife to dance for all the men, and then to pleasure himself, to pleasure Herod. A bad example of someone who clearly doesn't know how to celebrate a birthday when you're celebrating with adultery and lust and sin. And so it's a bad example.
Yeah, so the Bible, if you look at both of those stories, the Bible actually never says, hey, the birthday is the sinful thing. No, but it talks about all those other things are sinful, right? Adultery is sinful. Murder is sinful, right? Worshiping yourself as a god, those things are sinful. But the birthday, the holiday, or we could say any holiday, those things are not as sinful. It's the actions that come out of it that we have to be very mindful of.
Right. When the Bible mentioned, oh, it's Herod's birthday, I don't think that the writer of the gospel was saying, hey, you need to watch out for this as well and not celebrate your birthday. If you think that, you're reading into the text something that's not there. That's really bad hermeneutics. It would be really bad exegesis of the text. Rather, he's giving some detail. He's giving some narrative. And you have to look at the actual details that the author's drawing your attention to. That is Herod's sinfulness with his brother's wife.
Yeah.
Right? It's the debauchery in the birthday celebration. It's not the birthday itself. That would be like missing the forest for the trees, to look at the birthday and think, oh, that's the bad thing there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and the other thing to think about is, like, some people also, if we separate it from the bad, these examples in the Bible, right, they might say, hey, these birthdays, this used to be a pagan ritual, right? We can't celebrate it because it used to be pagan. But we also have to realize that God can redeem a lot of things, right? We have been so far removed from how birthdays were celebrated back then when it first was concocted to today, that there's enough separation and we can redeem it.
Right. So there's a principle in Christian philosophy that Christians generally have all agreed with, and that is that there is a degree of separation from something evil that we can partake. How do I say that better? There is a principle in Christian philosophy that Christians have generally all agreed with around the degrees of separation between something evil and something that came from that evil in the future. For instance, with birthdays, you see that there was maybe some pagan roots in the beginning, but there have been so many degrees of separation that for Christians to participate in that is not necessarily them participating in that evil. It's far removed from that, right? And there are other examples of ways where there are pagan roots. They're actually not very far behind, so we don't want to participate in that. My personal opinion, I don't want to practice yoga. I don't want to participate in yoga. The pagan roots are really close. It's really tied to the religion of Hinduism. I don't want to practice that. Birthdays to me are a very different category because of the length of separation between the pagan roots and where we're at now. Also, I would throw in the people say there are pagan roots for birthdays. There are some pagans who have used birthdays in the earliest times we have recorded that. There's not any evidence that they are like uniquely, this is only a pagan celebration. There were pagan birthday celebrations. There's no evidence that there weren't also Christians celebrating birthdays early on, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, birthdays started completely out of paganism. I think that's too broad of a generalization when you look at history. And when you look at church history, the celebration of birthdays is very rarely, if ever, condemned.
Yeah, yeah. And as if you start to think about this, right, then should we celebrate it? Can we celebrate it? Yes, right? There's enough separation. The key is, how do we celebrate it well, right? Like, how do we actually take all this separation and not actually fall into self-centeredness? And this is where I think happens in birthdays, where it's just all focused on the person, all focused on like, what are we giving them? What are we blessing them with? What toys, what food? And it could all almost just be all about the person, right? And not why we celebrate it. And as Christians, we celebrate it because we're reminding ourselves, we're recognizing first and foremost God's hand in that person's life. That God has been there for the past year, breathing life into the person, giving them the ability to walk, giving them the ability to bless others. Like God has sovereignly been in that person's world to make sure that that person is alive and well. And that's the beauty of birthdays, is to celebrate how God has just been there all along.
Yeah, I think another way is you read in the scriptures the importance of thankfulness.
Yeah.
You know, give in all things give thanks.
Yeah.
The Bible teaches us. And the reason we can give thanks is because all good things come from God. We are living on God's earth, breathing God's air. And so we have gratitude that God has given us all of the things that we've had in life and given us another year to look forward to of life. For you to celebrate your birthday should be done not in a, wow, I made it another year, but in a, God gave me another year and gave me a great year. And so I'm going to be thankful for God today. I personally think let's start putting prayer in birthday celebrations. Let's sing happy birthday with the cake and then pray, God, thank you for Ken having another year of life. Give him one more year in your kindness. You know, like let's start bringing that prayer of thankfulness into birthdays. And I think most Christians have that gratitude and thankfulness in their hearts already, because that's our disposition as newly created children of God who've been given a regenerated heart. Our disposition is to recognize, oh, this is a gift from God.
Yeah, the third way to celebrate is just remind yourself it's good to celebrate. Throw a party, throw something fun, not like throw something at someone, right? But like celebrate it, right? Ecclesiastes says that there's a time of peace and a time of war. There's a time to celebrate and a time not to celebrate. It talks about being merry and glad and rejoicing with friends. So bring people along, making sure that you guys have a time to celebrate. And here's a great example, and I learned this from my wife. She would have all of our friends come together, and whoever's birthday that is, they would say, hey, let's talk about what we see God doing in this person's life and how God's hand has been upon this person and what we're just grateful for that person and how God has used them in this season of life. And it just makes it like, man, God is actually using us to fulfill his mission. And it's so exciting when you do it at a birthday party. It's harder when you're doing it for a 4-year-old, right? But there's ways to celebrate God's life and God's hand in this person's life.
Yeah, you can still be thankful for the year that, I think let's teach our 4-year-olds to be grateful to God for giving them life.
Yeah,
I think that's great. Well, guys, we love talking about stuff like this. Should Christians celebrate birthdays? Theology, discipleship, Christian growth, that's what we're here for, to grow together, to learn together, to dive into the scriptures. So if that's you, if you like talking about this stuff too, if you're growing in your faith or you want to grow more in your faith, follow us and perhaps turn your notifications on so you get a notification, because we're having these conversations all the time about discipleship and prayer and really anything that around Christianity I think you'd be interested in. Go ahead and subscribe to us. And if you have any questions, thoughts, anything like that, leave it in the comments. We read all of them and we try to respond to as many as we can. And if you want more stuff, we've got a Facebook group with, at this point, we're
about 1,500 people.
Yeah, over 1,500 people. We've got over 500 blog posts on our website, and it's growing every day. So, if you're watching this a year from now, it could be even a lot bigger. So,
be cajillions.
Join in on all the stuff that we're doing, and let us know what you think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Hope you guys have a great day.
God bless.